We want to welcome you to our 5th annual Black Studies Open House events and our 1st annual Black Studies Focus Week. This year we've decided to expand our events for a whole week, and we've partnered with the UMKC Libraries and the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We're very pleased to invite you to learn more about Black Studies. Make sure that you pick up one of the brochures which tells you about our new coursework, and if you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, we have program information and information about our spring 2015 classes outside on the table. Our program faculty and staff include, in the house, we have Dr. Veronica Wilson-Tego. Please stand up and let us see you. Who's a professor, teaching professor of Black Studies, and other professors include Dr. Jacqueline Wood in English, Dr. Clovis Sims, professor of sociology, adjunct professor Albert Lowe in Black Studies, Mrs. Gloria Tibbs, one of our liaison librarians, Ms. Tracy Hughes, another of our liaison librarians, Ms. LaDonna McCullough, our administrative assistant, Ms. Camille Kimbrough, one of our work study students and future nurse, and Mr. Eugene Kelly, another of our work study students and future business mogul. We want to thank these people for their contribution to our program. Let's give them all a nice round of applause. Thank you. We also want to thank one of our former students, now a graduate at UMKC, Benita Jones of Ada Jones Design, who designed our brochures and our poster for this event. We are in discovery mode this week, beginning last night, starting on Columbus Day, a national holiday set aside for discovery. We're here to push the envelope and open the envelope with our discussions on the intersection of race, gender, and sports life in American culture. Our opening night last night was a phenomenal poetic presentation by nationally acclaimed spoken word artist Glenn North. It was awesome and all the way live. We look forward to your coming tomorrow night at our Black Studies building across the street. We will experience the insights of Dr. Raymond Boswell, who's the Vice President of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. He's going to talk about the national and international historic events for these Negro League players. We hope to see you on our final night, which will be Thursday night at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum on 18th Street, when we will host Dr. James L. Conyers from the University of Houston. His book, Race and Sports in America, is online at the Noah Nichols Library, and we have a copy in our building for you to take a look at. We have assembled a cadre of experts to guide us this week in this discovery. We are here to decode, unbundle, and to get better information on media images and sound bites which saturate our lives 24/7. How do we understand what's going on in terms of these issues, the intersection of race, gender, and sports life? Even as Sunday on the front page, above the fold in the New York Times, they had an article about football players from Florida State. And so we're looking at and all the issues that are around these issues of sports life and players of color. So we've all enjoyed our delicious Gates barbecue meal at the reception, and now we're getting to the meat of our presentation. We have UMKC Athletic Director Carla Wilson. She was named the 4th director in the Athletics Division I era in December 2013, after she held that position in an interim capacity for the 5 months prior. She leads the athletic department as it competes in the Western Athletic Conference. A woman of many talents, Wilson's leadership in the department has touched on numerous facets: budget, human resources, facilities, sports administration, and most importantly, student-athlete welfare and development. Wilson became the only female athletics director in the Western Athletic Conference and the first ever female leader of an intercollegiate athletics program at UMKC. She's one of the few women of color who serves as an athletic director for the NCAA 351 Division I institutions. She is the only African American athletics director in Division I who is not currently serving at an HBCU, and that's a historically black college or university. Are we fortunate at UMKC or what? In 2012, yes. In 2012, she was named the Division I Administrator of the Year by the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Administrators. She was a 2010 graduate of the very prestigious NCAA Fellows Leadership Development Program. She has been the sports administrator for 14 of the 16 sports at UMKC throughout her career: men's and women's basketball, men's soccer and softball, men's and women's tennis, men's and women's golf, men's and women's cross country, and men's and women's indoor and outdoor track and field. Expert at all sports. I love it. As a senior woman administrator, she's the highest ranking female involved in the management of athletics at UMKC. And a 25-year kangaroo, she was responsible prior in her administrative office as a budget person for overseeing the preparation of the university's then $159 million budget. She's an alum with a bachelor's degree in accounting, and in addition to managing athletics at UMKC, she is the phenomenal co-manager of her family, including her husband Kevin and 4 adult children. I need to take time management courses with this woman. We're so pleased that she can fit us into her schedule this evening. A.D. Wilson is joined by, in this discussion, by law professor Kenneth D. Ferguson. Ferguson earned his J.D. from the W.O. Coburn School of Law at Oral Roberts University in 1986. Before joining UMKC law faculty in 1992, Ferguson worked as a law clerk for Chief Justice Dennis Stewart of the Bankruptcy Court for Western Division of Missouri. He later practiced with Shukar Thompson and Kilroy in Kansas City, specializing in bankruptcy, litigation, and corporate law. Professor Ferguson instituted UMKC Law School's inaugural Sports Law Symposium that featured NCAA President Miles Brand and New York Times columnist and author William Roden, whose book, $40 Million Slaves, is featured in our Focus Week PowerPoint, which was playing before we started. Ferguson is nationally recognized for his work with USA Track and Field. This is the governing body for the United States Olympic Track and Field Program. He was elected to serve on the board of directors for this organization, and he also serves as president of the Missouri Valley Association, which is a local affiliate of the USATF. He's been a member of the board for the directors for the Swope Park Health Care Center for 17 years, and he's helped this center become a national model for inner-city health service and delivery. Ferguson's most recent article, Achieving Gender Equity Under Title IX for Girls from Minority, Urban, Rural, and Economically Disadvantaged Communities, was published this spring, 2014, in the Market Sports Law Review. We welcome insights from Professor Ferguson to this discussion on race, gender, and sports life in American culture. Have your pens and pencils ready. It's going to be a dynamic dialogue. Thank you both.
The way we're going to handle this panel is I will start off with sort of a summary of Title IX. And Title IX law is sort of going to be the sort of center point for us to address a number of different issues, all of which relates to, in some way, the Title IX matter. And then there'll be a couple of questions and answers going back and forth with us. And then
we welcome questions from you and answers that we may not have. But definitely this is going to be an interactive discussion. We welcome your feedback, your thoughts, your input. Feel free to agree to disagree. If something comes up that you feel strongly about, we want to hear from you. So we definitely want to talk about, sports as it relates to gender, to Title IX, to including sexual harassment, which is a part of Title IX, and how that relates in sports. And so we'll just kind of go through in the image that is portrayed women, and how is that different than men. So we're going to get started. We'll just talk a little bit about, about the law, Title IX or what it is?
I'll tell you what, I'll start off by sort of outlining in general terms what Title IX is and just its basic structure. Unfortunately, the overhead projector, you can tell I'm old school, is not working properly, so I'll talk. You know, Title IX, most of you have probably heard that the Title IX is the Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972. So it's a law that's been around for some time. It prohibits sex discrimination in education or in educational programs that receive federal funds. Title IX also includes athletics. Okay? Complying with NC2A rules and regulations or your high school athletics association rules and regulations does not excuse your compliance or an institution's compliance with Title IX. In any civil rights law, a civil rights law includes two components. One is one that deals with access to the program or equal access to the program. And when we talk about Title IX, there's some programs that focus, or part of the law that focuses on whether or not an institution is providing equal access to athletic programs for both men and women. The other component is what's called equal treatment. Once you're in the program, the question becomes, are women or female programs treated differently or the same as or on an equal basis as men's programs? And in looking at equal access, so from the outside of the law asks, are you providing equal access for women in your programs? And the way the law tests that, and I'll just speak about one of three different tests. And I'll speak about the one test that most institutions sort of look to follow, and that is, the institution must provide both male and female students equal opportunity to participate in sports or to participate on substantially equal rate basis. Okay? There are two other tests. One, have you demonstrated that you, in the history of your program, you have a continuing practice of providing expanded programs for both men and women, or really more specifically to the other representative class, which generally should be women. And then thirdly, you must provide both sports the same level of competition, whether it be nationally or regionally. So if you're a regional institution and all your programs are competing regionally, women's sports must compete at that level as well. Okay? And then the equal treatment, once they're in the program, they ask, are women getting the same scholarships that men are? Are they getting the same types of facilities, the same types of practice times? Are they getting the same kind of coverage that you would in the press media of the institution? And so what I'll do now, since that's sort of the framework within which an athletic department or a university operates, and so I'll start out by asking Carla our first question, is that, Carla, how has UMKC's athletic department complied with Title IX?
Well, as you said, there's three tests that you can do that show that you are providing equal opportunities to the female student athletes. And the first one is, which is the one that we have used the most, even though we have dabbled in all three. But the first one is, what is the percentage of female students on your campus as opposed to men? So at UMKC in 2013, it was 58% women. So that means that our student athletes, 58% of those should be women. So we, every year in October, due at the end of this month, there's called what is the Equity in Athletics Disclosure Act, EADA. We have to report to the federal government based on this, what is our percentage of student athletes, how many participants do we have, females and males, what is that percentage, and is it in substantial proportionality to the university's rate? So, again, like I said, in 13, I know was 58% women, and for our athletic department, it was 55% women. So, we have to get that number closer. 3% is pretty good, but if you can get within 1%, that's optimal. And the federal government is not specific. They leave it up to institutions, kind of how they're going to comply with this. So they don't tell you, you know, it has to be 3%, it has to be 1%, it has to be 5%. But 3 or less is usually the standard. You know, another way is to survey the student body, is to see what are we missing, what would you like to see? Is there a sport that you feel like should be at UMKC that's not here for the unrepresented sex? So if someone feels like there should be a lacrosse team, you know, field hockey team, you know, whatever team they feel like, and we still would have to evaluate that. Like, does it make sense for this area? So if we had a women's rifle team, are there any rifle teams around here that they could play, all that kind of stuff? Is it really something? Now, and again, we added women's soccer a few years ago. Women's soccer is very prevalent in this area. So that's another test that you can use as well. Have you added, they look at, have you added any female sports? Have you dropped any female sports or the unrepresented sex? So all those things come into play when you're looking at, are you in compliance with Title IX? So that is really the first part of how we do that, and we have done that, and we are in the process of doing that for this year, and hope to get those numbers even closer.
Now, Carla, you mentioned this 56% number. Mm-hmm. That is, I mean 58. That 58% of the female 58% the student body.
Yes.
Now, is that, and you hear a lot of institutions really fighting to get proportionality. Why is UMKC able, where most other institutions can't, or a lot of institutions can't? Why are you able to get 55% women versus, what, 53? What's the name?
Well, if it's 50, as far as the university, yeah, or for the...
Oh, okay, so 55% is what's represented in the athletic department.
Correct, okay. But it's 58 at the university. So we need to get closer to that 58.
But most other institutions, the gap is significantly wider than that. Why is that, and what is it about UMKC that essentially makes it easier for us to be that close to the number?
Like me. I think they like me, they just want me here. No. Well, we really want to talk to our coaches about it. So we purposely go out looking for female athletes, not just to fill the numbers, but that who can compete. And you know, our women's track and field coach and her staff do a very good job. You know, our women's soccer coach lives in Kansas City, and he does a really good job of going out and getting local talent and keeping them in Kansas City as well. And so I think for us...
Plus, you guys don't have football.
Thank goodness.
So
yes.
Because in most schools, football represents about 85 scholarships.
Yeah, if you look at, you know, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I think a lot of times with Title IX, the schools that have football, 80% of the schools that have, like at an FBS level, that have football and basketball, 80% of their entire athletics budget is going towards those two sports. So if you have 14 or 16 sports, 80% is going towards those two sports, football and men's basketball. So a lot of time when Title IX comes into play, it often comes into play that, well, we have to cut something because there's, you know, it's not proportionate, and, you know, there's lots of ways to do that when we're sitting here talking about it with 80% of the budget. And so when we talk about the media, I think that's a good segue. When we talk about the media and how the media portrays sports and athletics and gender and all that, when you hear on the TV that a school is cutting men's volleyball or hockey, you know, and in the same breath you hear Title IX, what do you think? What do you think is the reason that they are cutting those sports?
I think you, yes.
They're probably cutting the sports so they could reach that percentage of, you know, for that, the gender based ratio of sports.
Okay.
Also, that
Okay.
correlates with the population of gender at the school.
It's good. Keep that thought.
Well, obviously, income is a big factor. A revenue producer with basketball and football usually brings in more sponsorship money, more alumni money, more funds. So as a result, I think the budget is more heavily weighed because those are income producers. And so when they do cut those other types of sports, it's usually because they're less revenue producing sports, and they just so happen to be for men. So now they're trying to get that ratio in perspective.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting. What does UMKC do then? Because you don't have great revenue producing sports. Are you offering more half scholarships or partial scholarships to the females that are participating here at UMKC versus giving full ride scholarships?
Okay. Anyone else?
I think you just said what I was about to say.
Okay. Well, it's funny. I want to just talk about both of the things before I answer your question. You mentioned to get into proportionality, to get it closer to that number. There are so many ways. This is it's another myth that this is what has to be done. Whether it's, you know, football is bringing in all the money, so we got to cut these other sports because we need to keep football, or that kind of thing. Well, football does not, you know, that's the one that's bringing all the money. Well, most football programs run a $3 million deficit, so they're not covering the money that they bring in. They are not covering. Basketball programs right at $900,000 to $1 million too. Deficit. So in actuality, that is what the media would have you think. That is what the school may often want you to think. But that is a myth. That is not the case. And as far as what okay.
The other thing too is that in some schools, it depends on how they sort of measure profit loss. Because if you include the cost of all the other institutional programs, then they may also show a loss. But generally speaking, and I think you're right, is that most collegiate programs are operating on a negative budget. Okay, now there's some, you know, FBS, the Big Five schools that are profitable, but generally they're operating at a deficit. But it also represents a commitment on the part of the institution to you know, not only a commitment to sports, but commitment to those athletes, so that they could, through sports, be able to get their education. And so there's a part of the cost of education.
But so is the football programs student athletes, or the basketball student athletes programs more important than the men's tennis program? If you spend, Rutgers had 6 home football games in which they had their football team stay in the hotel for a home football game the night before. $175,000 to do that. That's more than the entire budget of the tennis team, which they eliminated at Rutgers.
Well, I mean, we talked about this earlier, Carla, that some of these issues are really, I think, are sort of moral questions that an institution has to answer. Are we providing athletic programs to our students because we value the things that athletics can teach those students? And so if that's my focus, I may take a much different approach to dealing with how we achieve gender equity from any institutional standpoint, particularly when, if we make the general statement that most institutions are operating at a deficit, then it becomes, I think it becomes more a question, how do we go about achieving that gender equity? Do we eliminate men's programs? And there are some schools who are eliminating or minimizing women's programs. So it happens on both sides of the line. And so it really comes down to, from a moral perspective, what are we going to do as an institution? Do we value what, not only the wins and losses, but do we value what the athletic experience can provide, the richness that it can provide our students if they approach it from a pure perspective? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I really don't think, I mean, the institution can try to do everything they want to do, but it's almost like it's based around like the students. So if we aren't from an area that thinks that men's volleyball is something that, like we all want to see, we're not going to attend the event or anything like that, if that makes sense. So it's like, the institution can do everything they can and try to make sure that Title IX is followed and everything, but it's kind of like, what does the student body want to see?
Well, that's a good point, because when I was talking about the three tests that you can do, that is one of them. So if the students continue to say, no, this is not something we need or not something that we want to see, then we've satisfied providing the equal opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have, you don't have to do it to get into proportionality. That's one of the things you can do. So there's different things you can do, and one of them is seeing what your student population wants to see and what sports they think should be added or not added or, not supported. And so you can get around having to be in proportionality because you have surveyed history, all that to see what is one about a student body.
Okay.
Now the other thing, I think your question you asked may have implications, I think, for the statement that you made with respect to revenue producing sports. Because a sport like volleyball, softball are generally not going to produce the same revenue or the potential revenue that a sport like basketball can produce.
Unless you play volleyball, unless you played Missouri last night with a packed crowd of 1,200 people and you beat them. I mean, and that I just want to get that.
So we should play them every weekend. But congratulations. But again, you've got that sort of money component that plays a part of the whole athletic program. Can we generate funds through all of our programs? And the program where, at least for UMKC, where there's the potential for great revenue generating is the basketball program. Okay, but again, yeah.
So
I'm sorry. I think you had your hand up. Yes, ma'am. Deborah.
What happens in the case of, like, when you take a survey, the student body shows that they want to add a sport, like, for instance, baseball or maybe football, ones that we don't have, but I feel like a lot of students talk among themselves and wish that we had. Does it change the Title IX standards, or how does that process work?
The survey is about the underrepresented
Group.
Whether it's, so if females were being underrepresented, then you would have to, you would ask about those sports.
Okay.
What sports for women would you like to see? Oh, I know what I was going to say. In relation to money, we're talking about, you know, the revenue generating sports and how those, you know, need to help cover the rest of the department and that type of thing. And I think it's also a big area where we get into trouble when we look at money and what it, you know, again, like you said, what else are the student athletes doing for you? And what are they, there's more value, their education, they're getting an education, they're getting a degree, if they're doing well, you know, our student body population, GPA is higher than the general population at a 3.22 is the cumulative GPA of all of our athletes. So there's more to it than just about them playing sports and producing money. So when we talk about that, to me, that leads me into a part of Title IX that has really been in the news lately, and that's sexual harassment. And that's really been in the media. And, you know, there's a lot of things going on, and some things it has been meant to say that maybe they weren't brought to light because of that student athlete's worth in dollars to that institution, and what happens if that student athlete no longer be a part of that. So I think there's a couple of things around sexual harassment that we could look at. One is the media's portrayal of that accurate and reality. There's been a lot.
So here's, when you say media portrayal, are we talking about the percentage of incidents of quote unquote sexual harassment on campus versus the general population?
That's one aspect of it,
Okay.
correct. Is the media portraying what's going on in the general population? I've seen a lot of media coverage of what's going on the sports side of the house, at the collegiate level, at the professional level. So one, is their portrayal accurate as far as the coverage of it tends to see this is where your problem is. One, if there are problems with 10 people and there's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 athletes, what percentage is that? And then also, in the general, in the world in general, what is that percentage? And is it being accurately reflected to say, or is it just being...
Well, let me ask the audience. When you look at TV, media coverage of sexual harassment or even domestic violence where it involves athletes, I mean, what message does that send you regarding whether the percentages are more significant simply because you're dealing with athletes, or does what occurs within the athletic sphere, is it comparable to what's going on in the general population?
I think one thing that I think about in terms of the media coverage is the number of times we hear it. It could be happening in the general population every day, but we may hear about it in the news story on Monday and never hear about it again. And it happens in the sports world, we hear about it 10 times on Monday, 12 times on Tuesday, 14 on Wednesday, and so on.
And you hear it every time that athlete or that school or that team plays. Okay. But so if you're hearing that, what message does this send to you? Not only about the percentages or the prevalence of that kind of conduct, but the identity of the people who are committing those acts of sexual harassment or domestic violence.
I feel like for me, I guess I feel like I can look at it deeper, like how she said that, it's just reported more, in the athletic population and things like, in certain, with certain groups and things like that. But I feel like, not to like the untrained eye, but to just, a common person sitting there watching it, they're thinking, oh, it is more prevalent in the athletic field and things like that. So it can come across that, you know, that it does make, you know, athletics kind of have a certain stigma and things like that. But I guess it's all about, I guess it's all about how you're looking at it. Like to me, I feel like I would dig deeper and things like that, but it can easily come across to people that, oh, this is just something that's going crazy in the athletic field and things like that. So I think that's just an issue that people have to face.
Like a typical story is always how like there's an athlete and then something always happens with the coach. Like you always hear about that and they're just like, you know, yeah, the coach is doing this to an athlete. But like you don't hear about stuff like that on like an everyday basis. Like the thing with University of Penn Valley or something like that. I mean Penn State, I think. Yeah. That was like big. Like you heard about that and it just kept going on and kept going on. But then like other situations, it's like, okay, they talk about it and then it's like, okay, back to bigger news. This is like, and then they bring that back up.
Well, and I think what two things it does, and I'll raise another question too, because it minimizes the problem in the larger population, okay? And it allows us to focus attention on, you know, an identified group to focus our anger, okay? And oftentimes, I've done some research on this, and oftentimes the anger and the focus that people have are sometimes unrelated to the problem. It may be the race of the individuals that sometimes people are reacting to, and they're upset about. And so the focus on the sexual harassment may be just another way of venting sort of this unspoken bias that I may have. And I mean, there's a lot of literature on that whole dynamics. But I think when that happens now, it really prevents us from really addressing the underlying problem. Instead of looking at ways to fix the problem, we look at ways simply to blame and ostracize. And I look at the Ray Rice situation where, and I really look at his wife, Jana, and the fact is, she was victimized by getting hit. And then she was victimized again by the media by having that video shown over and over and over again. Now there's some media outlets that decided we're not going to show this. She was victimized by the NFL, okay, because they marched her out in front of an audience, and she had to say, I'm sorry. You know, I mean, if I'm looking at that, and one, I wouldn't want her in front of the camera. And you know, I wouldn't advise an athlete to bring his wife, who he just physically abused. You know, I mean, it's not like you slept with another woman, although that's bad enough. You know, but you know, I mean, you physically abused her. You know, and so the only thing that I should be seeing from you is, you know, some kind of a contrite spirit, and I'm in treatment. I mean, if you want to deal with it, right? You know, but anyway, I didn't know I was that passionate.
I have one question, but it doesn't relate to anything we've been speaking about. I just wanted to know, how do you feel like UMKC addresses the needs of African American athletes on campus when they come from school, when they come into a university setting where they're not ready to go to class, they're not essentially ready to take the classes that they're taking and balance that kind of schedule of sports?
And when you say they're not ready to take, can you expand a little bit on that?
Not ready as in like many of, you know,
From an
let's say
educational standpoint?
From an individual standpoint, if they're from inner city schools that have been like recruited to play sports, and they're just not ready to take, like, educationally, they weren't, you know, acclimated to take higher education just yet. How do you integrate them into the system at UMKC specifically?
Well, there's several ways. One, there are NCAA rules that say they won't be eligible to come here if they don't meet so many rules, core classes and having to pass certain classes and number of classes in English and math and that kind of thing. So they have to be admitted by the university. So the university has to feel that they can be successful as well. We do several things. One thing we do is in the summer, we have a summer bridge program. And that is to help them get acclimated to college, where we bring them in the summer where they're only taking one class versus taking a full load, where they go through, they're submerged in a program about study skills, time management, all the things that they are going to be dealing with. Because they're required to spend so many hours in study hall. We have a study hall area. If they do their studying in the library or on the road, there are certain forms that have to be filled out by those people. So we do everything. There's an assessment done of their level, all of that to make sure that they're getting the proper attention that they need with tutors or that, in study sessions and all those types of things. So, because our goal is to watch them walk across the stage is first and foremost. They're here to be a student athlete. Without the student, they cannot be the athlete because they have to maintain certain standards. So we do have an academic area that's part of our department that helps them, get the tutors they need, that mentors them, to make sure that they are, we do grade checks, make sure they're going to classes, all those kinds of things to make sure that they're being successful as they can be. And then, again, time management's a part of that, but we want them to be integrated in campus. So, and know more people and learn more about what's going on at the school because this is their school. So whether it's multicultural student affairs at some of them, whether it's the African American Student Union that they're involved in, we've had a number of our athletes be involved in both of those areas to, get some guidance and some being integrated within the campus as well.
This may not have anything to do with the conversation, but I think it's like her question reversed. So what about those students that are able to take the courses, however they're in like high schools that don't afford them the opportunity to be like recruited and stuff like that? So it's like every day there's a lot of students that at the schools that they're at, they're like the top athletes and things like that, but because they're at schools that aren't like, I can only think of St. Louis, that aren't like, Ladue or Clayton or anything like that, they're able to come to a university and risk the fact of trying to walk on and not making it into a sport than if they were afforded,
Again, if the high school didn't offer what they needed, there's an evaluation done before they even come in the recruitment process where we get preliminary transcripts to see what they've taken, to see what they're missing, to see if they can get that in their last year of school, or if they're at a junior college, are they going to get their associates, are they going to get what they need, and we can advise them on the classes that they need and what they need. In some cases, they may not be able to do that, or they already finished and they haven't done that, and they may not be able to go to that school. So a lot of times, or sometimes, you will see some really good athletes that don't go to KU or don't go to Duke or wherever they originally planned because they don't have the academic background that they need. So they may go away to a junior college for a year to try to get their grades to where they need to be and to get what they need in order to go to a four-year institution and transfer later. So if they don't meet the criteria, there are certain criteria, there are appeals that you can do in certain situations, and they may not be able to come to the institution.
What as we're focusing on education, to me, one of the most appalling things, and you brought it up in terms of what we do with athletes who come in who are deficient from an educational standpoint, or even at their high school. And I think you sort of put the finger right on the underlying problem. Is that what is the educational base that they're getting? I mean, there's a whole generation of minority kids, Black, African American kids, that are missing life's opportunity because they come out of programs that are not focused on making sure that those kids are educated. Now, I may be wrong, but it seems to me you don't have to spend millions of dollars to educate somebody. Okay, but again, I'm just this professor that's in this ivory tower. But at some point we've got to make that our focus, because and I tell you, I mean, we can talk about it from a, I say from a sort of emotional standpoint, but I think that the law can get a lot of people to be moving. And one of the things that we talked about, Title IX, for example, and the question is, does Title IX, deal with education? It deals with educational programs that prevent girls or boys from getting equal access to educational opportunities. Okay, Title VI is the same thing, and so really, literally, and sometimes in this country, you'll get movement when the potential costs are pretty high. Okay, so for example, on the Title IX, I'm sorry, on the Title VI, or Title VII, which deals, Title VI and VII. Title VI deals with discrimination, and young African American boys and girls can bring an action against their school systems because they're either denying them access to educational opportunities, either by not having appropriate facilities or resources, but also the statistics have shown, and we'll come back because we're talking about the basis now for those athletes that are coming into to colleges. There are statistics that show that African American males get disproportionately higher punishment for things that other students don't get nothing but a slap on the hands. And so as a result now, because of the disproportionate exercise of punishment, these kids they're dismissed from school. Okay? And so on the Title VI now, if you're what's called, if you're deliberately indifferent to that problem, okay, that school district could be liable. And so in a sense, the next move ought to be, going after these school districts to deal with the lack of educational skills that our athletes have and students have in general. Because if it's happening to athletes, look at the larger population of students that are coming into university. So there's some real serious problems.
One thing I wanted to talk about real quick, because I know we're out of time here, but I wanted to also talk about the media's portrayal of female athletes, whether it's their sports teams or whether it's them individually. But female athletes make up about 40% of the population in the world. In college, it's about 55% are female student athletes. Okay. Yet, what percent of the media coverage do you think?
15.
15? 10%? 8%? You hit the nail on the head. 2%.
That's ridiculous.
And of that 2% of the media coverage that female sports are getting and female athletes, the coverage they're getting is normally not even in their sport. And what I mean by that is usually for them being either for them being a sports analyst where they are dressed up and beautified and looking pretty, and so we're not even focusing on their athletic competence. And therefore, if we're looking at people, are we looking at those female athletes, you know, are we looking at them in a different light? That they're not really athletes, they're really known for their, you know, femininity and sexual prowess and that kind of thing. How many people have seen the I Will, I Want videos? Has anybody seen the Under Armour I Will, I Want videos?
Yeah.
Well, Under Armour has, Under Armour clothing line has realized that they are missing out on a huge population, the female population, when it comes to their sales and generating revenue. Nike's just got all the profit share. So they came out with a new campaign that features female athletes to try to sell their clothes and to say, here's female athletes and get the female population in, right? Well, I believe there's six, I think there are 6 people, and there's a couple of questions here. One is, there is a women's professional skier, downhill skier, tennis player, soccer player, a ballerina, something, I can't remember the other one, and a model. Well, there's been a lot of hoopla about the model and whether she is an athlete. That's one of the things.
But the question is how are they portraying women athletes?
Exactly. So I'm going to show you one of these. I'm going to show you, and you tell me what you think. What are they being portrayed? Here's one.
Dear candidate, thank you for your application to our ballet academy. Unfortunately, you have not been accepted. You lack the right feet, Achilles tendons, turnout, torso length, and bust. You have the
same search that you just did, I will what I want, and then add Renee Slum Stevens. It should pull up the.
Got a video at the top.
And do you have to put in YouTube behind your name? There's a,
If you're traveling every week, you're on the road. It's not a 9 to 5, it's like a 24/7. Making the commitment to do what I love every day has been the best thing I've ever done. You want to be badass, you want to be beautiful, you want to be strong, you want to be encouraging, you want to stay motivated. And that's tough, that's always tough. But I love tennis. I enjoy having to step up and just work hard every day and compete, week in and out. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone feels like they should be a coach. And everyone feels like they know what's best for you. But they rip you apart. If you let them get to you, you lose sight of everything that's inside of you. And you just gotta do you. Focus on yourself. Be proud of what you're doing. Definitely when I put on my Under Armour logo, every day almost, I feel motivated. I feel good. And I definitely love my brand, and they support me 100%, so it's been awesome. I will what I want.
So when you see these, I mean, when you're looking at these and you're seeing that this person is a professional world champion downhill skier, and 2% of the media coverage on women athletes.
I will what I want means that I can do what I want, when I want to, and it doesn't matter what anyone else says. And right now, I'm coming back from my second knee injury. People are saying that, she can come back strong. I don't know, and I know. And I will what I want. I want to be successful again, and I will. Every time I have a setback, I always feel like it's meant to be. There's a reason for it, and it's just kind of that process that I've learned to sort through in my mind, picking the positives, learning from my mistakes, and then pushing forward towards a new goal. Everyone has their strengths. Everyone has, that little voice inside them that says, keep pushing on, just whether you listen to it or not. That's what makes you a successful downhill skier, is that you have no fear. You have no fear of falling. You have no fear of failure. You're just pushing yourself to the limit, and that's what I absolutely love about my sport, is that it's just you in the mountain. I will what I want.
If you compare how they promote men's sports, you see the athlete actually performing. Okay, and there was a study that was done by I forgot some UCLA professors, USC, and they looked at they gave the collegiate athletes pictures to look at in terms of asking them how do they see themselves as athletes. And so they showed them several different pictures. They showed one picture where an athlete is actually, female athlete is actually performing their sport. The second picture was an athlete that had some sports paraphernalia in the picture, but the athlete was not necessarily performing their sport. The third is what they call soft porn. Okay, but some of these pictures that you see and you've seen like Venus or Serena Williams and some pretty racy pictures, and even the hurdler Lola Jones. Okay, and so they ask collegiate athletes, female athletes, how would you like to be seen? Okay, and almost 85% of those athletes will choose the picture that demonstrates their competence in their sport. Okay, and it's always a picture where they're performing their sports. They're in some kind of a uniform. You'll have some of them that would choose a mixture of both this competent exposure plus a mixture of a picture where you know there is an athlete, but they're not dressed as an athlete. And the smallest number of them, less than 2% of them, want to be depicted in a sexually provocative manner. But that's not how the media portrays female athletes.
I have a comment. In putting together our focus video, the PowerPoint that we put together, Ms. Skipper and I had a hard time finding a decent photograph of Nicole Lyons, the racetrack NASCAR driver. And then we read about the fact that there had been a phony Nicole Lyons who'd been posing, a black woman model who'd been posing as Nicole Lyons, not even really her, posing draped across the car in very scantily clad clothing. It's not even Nicole Lyons, but that's the photographs that had gone out about her as this NASCAR driver, and then she had to recover her own image and put pictures of herself out there fully in the NASCAR uniform, standing next to her car to counter the model portrayals, someone that they had paid this woman to pose as Nicole Lyons.
I would definitely say, be careful with the media, because the media can bring you together, it can tear you apart, Carlos.
We have a media person up here.
It can bring you together. I can look at what the Little League World Series, and you see, you see the Chicago, you see their team, West. What's their name? Monet Davis, and from Philadelphia. But she's playing, and there's a big focus on her because she's playing what is traditionally known as a male sport. So here we're getting lots of coverage of her, and not only is it a male sport, she's a pitcher, kind of runs the show in a male sport, and you're getting all this coverage of her. Because but at the same time, there was another little girl playing in the World Series. Did you ever hear about her? Didn't hear anything about her because she wasn't as prominent, wasn't, and again, but the attention was because it was more of a male sport anyway, though, the fact that, because you don't see, and you saw pictures of Monet in uniform, and you saw pictures of her on the front of Sports Illustrated, but at the same time, you see these types of you can't get them in their sport. Yes, Mr. Media.
All right. For Cascade Sports point of view, what we want to say, can you attest that we have covered every woman's sport?
Absolutely.
At UMKC,
Cascade Media
and
has been a great
we've
partner.
interviewed most of the athletes, women and men, because I feel the women do get a raw deal across the board. But we try to pay attention to our women athletes, even though they don't get the money or they don't get the participation, but we feel that they deserve, just for playing sports, they deserve some coverage.
I would agree with that, and I would say that Cascade Media has given us more media attention than we have had in years. And so I do thank you. We definitely appreciate you. You've done interviews, and you've done interviews of our student athletes doing their sport. They're out on the track, and you're interviewing them there in their track clothes while they're going over hurdles or long jumping. You're covering our competitions for our sports. Again, you've been in everything. So that's not to say, universally everybody, but if you look at the large, what you see most of the time on TV, it can be skewed. And so really dig deep when the media is presenting something, and again, and when it's pounded in your head because they're showing it to you 50 times over and over and over again, where you start to think, man, and it could be totally a bad situation, but it gets beat down over and over and over again. Is it, when you think about it in proportion, is it being covered the same way for men as women, for minorities as it is Caucasians? You know, all of those types of things are things that we really need to look at and dig deep and think about what's being said. I mean, I know the Rutgers basketball game, you guys remember that, where the women's basketball team was playing, and yeah, oh, there's some nappy-headed hoes, you know, or, you know, just had a lot of, ooh, well, they should be able to, their arms are longer. I mean, just all types of connotation that took away from the fact that they were good athletes.
I have one more question. Do you think the media covers African American athletes in the same light as they cover the majority community?
When you say in the same light?
In the same light, for the same infractions, investigations, investigative reporting, do you think that they...
Well, I mean, you know, take for example, this Ray Rice situation. And I want to say, I'm totally against what he did. Okay? I mean, hitting a woman, in my mind, is unacceptable. Okay? But when you see those pictures, and you see the number of times they're shown and the number of athletes that they're showing, you really get the sense, or the sense that, well, you know, this is an African American male problem. Okay. Well, there's some studies that have been looked at to see whether the NFL's incidents of crimes, whether there are incidents of violent or domestic abuses are any higher than the general population. And in fact, it isn't. You know, the incidence of domestic violence in the NFL is 50% of what's in the general population. Now, and so because, yeah, so only 13%, if you look at all crimes that NFL athletes engage in, the percentage is only 13%. Okay? The general population is somewhere about 26, you know, plus. So if you look at it, that's not the message that's being sent by the media.
That's the point I was making. By being in the media,
yeah.
that's what I see is accentuate the negative and exclude the positive.
Yes. Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last question. Or you had a comment or a question? I know you had your hand for a long time, you probably forgot.
I wanted to say a couple things. I had a couple questions, but I mean, it was the last question was really about the women in sports. It was about basically, I don't know, I agree with the point that they do paint women athletes more sexually and photography on. But the question is, if they don't do it like that, how would you recommend they do it? Because it's hard to market women in sports. I'm a sports fan, and I love basketball. I watch almost anything basketball, but it's hard for me to watch a WNBA game because it's just not the same. And so I tried for years to watch it actually, and I just couldn't do it. And so I was like wondering, like, how would you go about marketing women's sports to men other than, you know?
You have an answer?
Yeah, I think so. I would say to break those barriers and stereotypes of women being looked at as just something to look at, beautifulized and everything like that. That's the only way you can, you know.
I agree. I would say like most like college women athletes, they probably play basketball better than men. They actually have more skills like handles, shooting, but it's hard for me to watch a game without seeing somebody dunk. You know?
But if you do see the opposite, it's like
You watch Baylor, you watch Brittany Griner.
I watched her, yeah, because she can dunk. But that's like less than 50.5% of basketball population.
Would your
Swimming with host law. I mean, I could go down Candace Parker. I know all these lucky ladies. I watch, like I said, I do watch a lot of sports. So, you know, and I try to be a fan. I And then-
walking around in some Speedos and talking about basketball. Why do we not see that? Exactly, exactly. So, I think it,
I don't think men would have a problem with doing that either, because they like to show their chest and all that,
Yeah.
for one. And then two, if you watch a lot of like NBA and football commercials, they always in their uniforms, you know, like you can watch a random commercial and they had the football player in his full uniform. Like,
Exactly.
so like, what is, I mean, that's not right either, because that's like depicting them only as a football player. So, I mean, I think those.
I think you've got to look at it from this perspective. If the statistics that you just mentioned is that women's sports are portrayed, promoted on news media 2% of the time. Well, I mean, if they're not getting seen, there's no way for you to get sort of accustomed to seeing women's sports. Okay. And I think, I mean, if you are seeing it on an ongoing basis, they will get their own audience. Now, it may not be, if there's not enough dunking, you're not going to get people who love dunking, okay? But you know what? If you see enough women's sports, you'll begin to appreciate some of the skills that they have. But if you only see it 2% of the time, that's not enough time for anybody to get tuned into it and to be able to develop a love or a following for it. So somehow you've got to, and I think if you look at television, you could find women's sports on television. If you go to cable, you could find all kinds of sports. But if you look at the networks where major sports are broadcast, those numbers are relatively low. Okay, and I think that's where it's got to start. If you have any chance to be for women's sports to be able to develop the following that they need.
and I want, like I said, I want to thank Cascade Media, because you're doing what we want to see trending out into the population, and the portrayals that you're doing of female athletes are the portrayals that we want to see, and that depict them as athletes and not, as a sex symbol. Yeah, exactly.
This is really the last question.
Do you think that it's an issue that a majority of the African Americans in higher education during undergraduate are in athletic programs? I believe in 2013 UCLA had an issue where 7% of the African American men on campus that were undergraduates were not in the athletic program. It seems like in the African American community, there's association with higher education and playing sports. And it seems like there's a need to play sports in order to get in higher education. And do you see that as an issue?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And I mean, my only response would be to look at this thing from an educational standpoint. And look at the quality of education that are being provided to our young men and women at critical stages in their educational development. And that is pre-kindergarten, okay? Within the first 3 years of education, if you don't get the skills and you don't get the exposure, it becomes more and more difficult. So, I mean, you put your finger on a very critical issue, and that is, why aren't we as incensed with the fact that education is not the center point of what we provide our athletes or provide our young people in general? Because those if you don't have an education in this country, okay, your chances of being financially self-sustaining is pretty low. Okay, and I'll close my comment because this is something that is passionate for me. You know, the fact that, you know, if I'm going to school and I see the value of an education, how can I sit by? And if I'm a school administrator, I'm a school teacher, and I know the value of education, how can I sit by and give a next generation an education that you know is going to destroy it?
Right.
How could you? How could you? That's the problem. Okay? And that's why you, if that's happening at UCLA, that's an indictment to our educational system, and that's an indictment to the educational system that minority students are getting, and that inner city students are getting. Okay, and that's problematic, God.
Yeah, I had a comment and a major concern that first of all, I'd like to commend my alumni, UMKC, for a 3.22 for their student athletes across the board. I think they did a hand for that. Second about what the issues as a parent, I had two Division I athletes, one Division II, and what happens with the black student when they attend major universities is, yeah, they're qualified when they come in, and although they may not have the same skill set in terms of education to their competence, what I've seen a lot of times is the fact that schools do a lot to try to make them eligible, to stay eligible. And so they steer them in degrees that are not going to be very proficient in a world when they get out of college. So you now have steering so you can get a student to make sure they're in general studies versus elevating them in business or potentially, you know, something that will lead to a truly higher education. So they're attending these schools, but they're not really getting the types of degrees that's going to make them efficient when they leave.
I mean, you know, and unfortunately, I mean, that's something I saw in 1971 when I went to college. Okay, that there were a number of my colleagues that were being told this, they're setting their grade, their classes for them. Okay. And the NC2A and the regulations that apply, I mean, it adds to it, because the focus is now progress towards graduation.
Right.
Regardless of whether that progress towards graduation may put you in a field that, you know, gives you greater opportunity, because that's what the eligibility focus is got to be. So if for a student athlete to sort of be able to move their way through that forest, I mean, they have to be pretty independent.
What makes it really difficult is because the progress towards degree, where you have to be whatever your degree is, and you have to be 20% complete, 40% complete, you know, 60% complete after your third year, 80% complete, that kind of thing. What really hurts, and this is universal with college students, that you change your major. Like you decided that ain't what you want, and you want to change to something else. But when you do that in athletics, now you're not meeting that percentage of degree that you had to have, percentage of your requirements in that degree. So a choice has to be made to stay in the other degree and continue to play the sport you want, or go to a general studies one to play the sport you want, or continue, but you may not be able to play the sport because you want to get a degree in something else. So it's really hard for athletes to change their majors, you know, and remain eligible in a lot of cases. And so when they, you know, want to do one or the other, you know, sometimes they have to choose. If they...
And that, to me, that's the most unfortunate thing about it.
And it's really kind of, the purpose when the NCAA put that in was to make sure that you're educating kids and moving them towards getting a degree, and that they are getting degrees. But on the flip side, it hurts them if they decide they don't want to do biology anymore and they want to go to business, and they do not have the foundation and the number of classes that were degree applicable in business to meet that 60%. Robert.
But at some schools with the really solid career and academic advising like we have here, when students face that situation, sometimes they're fortunate enough to get a waiver where you're explaining to the NCAA about that career change. But again, that takes an investment from the top to make sure that you have a good academic advisor in your department. And that's where the schools that really do have the student's best interest at heart with the leadership in place, they make sure that they have safeguards in place when that comes up. And unfortunately, there are a lot of schools that don't have the top-down concern that we do here and the leadership that we have in academics to win those kind of waivers. And that's what's sad when you get to a conference and some schools have never even tried and they tell their students that that's their path versus a school like UMKC with leadership like ours that says, no, we can get you where you need to be, where you want to be.
And we do that quite often, and actually Robert's quite successful with his waiver process. So we're like, I don't know how, but when that happens, when somebody wants to change their major because they're doing the right thing, they have done everything they were supposed to do in the major they were in, but now they have made a career change. They were successful when they went that route. It wasn't that they were just, fooling around or whatever, but they have decided that that's not the area they want to focus on. So we do submit waivers on the behalf of those students all the time. We do that instead of saying, well, no, you just got to be here or you got to be here, because at the end of the day, it's about them getting an education. And if that's that's the field they want to go into, then that's what we're going to support them.
Well, this has been really Ferguson, and thank you, audience, for coming out and supporting our programming. Hope to see you tomorrow night as well. Ida, did you want to make your comment?
Oh, yes. On the behalf of the Multicultural Students Affairs, I would like to extend an invitation to our Legacy Summit on African American Leadership this Friday. It begins at, I believe, 8:15, and I have sign-up forms right here, so please see me after.